What's going on, guys? I have another great video for you. We're going to be talking about Google stock here today. And Google recently had an employee meeting in New York. It was called their all hands on deck meeting, and they had it between the CEO and basically all the employees asking questions. So there's a lot of interesting comments from both sides, both questions from the employees and the return comments from the CEO. So we're going to dive into that in this video here today. But before we get into that, we will take a look at Google's chart. We're going to take a look at their balance sheet, where they're sitting at in terms of cash, and then we'll leave off the video by actually looking at what the next big event for Google is and how some of these questions could be foreshadowing of what we could expect from that event. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure you drop a like down below, and if you want to see more videos like this one, make sure you hit that sub button. Let's go ahead and take a look at Google's chart. So here today, they were up a little over 2.5%. The rest of the market also bounced up, so this is not very surprising of a move. Over the last 5 days, they're up a little over 1%. Last month, they're down almost 9%. Last 6 months, down almost 30%. And year to date, down 31%. And this is absolutely an insane move for a stock of Google's size, which is sitting at a $1.31 trillion market cap. So let's go ahead and jump into some of what was discussed during this all hands on deck meeting from the CEO and the employees. And maybe we'll get a little bit of foreshadowing of what is here to come from Google and where its stock price could be headed. And here's the article that we are going to be going over today. And it's by CNBC, and it's titled, Google CEO Pichai tells employees not to equate fun with money in heated all hands meeting. So just to reiterate, at a company-wide all-hands meeting this week, Pichai was faced with tough questions from employees related to cuts to travel and entertainment budgets, managing productivity, and potential layoffs. So obviously there we have a lot of hot topics that we are going to be talking about. The biggest one being potential layoffs. So potential layoffs, that is already concerning, especially if you are an employee in the company. Hearing the word layoffs is just bad news all around. The first question that we got from an employee was, why is the company nickeling and diming employees by slashing travel and swag budgets at a time when Google has record profits and huge cash reserves? And Pichai responded by saying, look, I hope all of you are reading the news externally. The fact that you know we are being a bit more responsible through one of the toughest macroeconomic conditions underway in the past decade, I think it is important that as a company, we pull together and get through moments like this. So overall, that's a very CEO typical response. But what I wanted to point out is the recognition of toughest macroeconomic conditions that we've seen in the past decade. So it's good that Google, again, is being responsible, like Pichai mentions here, and sees that there are tough conditions going on in the market right now, but also the potential for tougher situations coming into the future. And they've already preemptively, again, started slashing some of these budgets, travel, parties, things that are kind of seen as unnecessary to hopefully help reduce that cost without affecting the business in a very substantial way. And with that comment from the employee, right, that Google is obviously and has continued to see a lot of strong growth over the last couple of years. But here in the third quarter, sales are expected to dip into single-digit growth. That's down from 40% a year earlier. So that is absolutely massive there, right? So Google has obviously capitalized a lot on the stay-at-home workplace and things like that, where a lot of retailers have kind of been forced to advertise online because a lot of people were at home, using the internet, using their phone, and obviously Google is going to benefit from that type of environment. And that is, as that has kind of changed, obviously their growth has slightly changed. So we're seeing that dip in their growth, and Pichai has kind of also admitted that this is not only due to the economy. So it's also caused by a lot of the expanding bureaucracy within Google. So one of the big things that a lot of tech companies did over the last couple years is expand their hiring programs. So they didn't want to be left behind by other companies. As money became cheap, there was a lot more money to spend on larger projects and internal projects. And with that, you need someone to manage those projects and work on those projects. So they expanded their hiring to bring on a lot more new people. And as we start to see the reverse of that, where money becomes more tight, we are going to see the same kind of instance happen where we will see a lot of tightening down of of special projects, right? A lot of these quote unquote special projects, large projects that people were working on, they might be cut, and thus those jobs are no longer needed. So it's something to be very interested in, especially from a business perspective, because we've gone through a massive amount of growth, and now we are quickly going into a very leaning down cycle. An example of that leaning at Google was their Pixelbook laptops. So they actually cut funding for their Area 120 in-house incubator. So this is basically an area where they generate a lot of new ideas, new things like that. So they cut some of the funding to it, and they actually completely canceled the next generation of Pixelbook. And I believe I read in a similar article from this meeting that actually the team that was working on the next generation of Pixelbook was actually also laid off. So they've already started some of the process here of, leaning down their team and looking at the company holistically and being like, what is necessary for the company to keep moving forward and what is unnecessary kind of fat that needs to be trimmed. And with the trimming of fat, Pichai also is targeting 20% more productivity from the company. And he plans on doing that while slowing hiring and investments. And I highlighted here slowing hiring because that is absolutely massive, right? He doesn't say laying people off. He just wants to hire less people moving forward. So if they are bringing on 5 new projects, and in the past, over the past 2 years, they would have hired, let's say, 50 new people to take on those 5 new projects. Maybe instead they only hire 10 new people, and they have people who are working on existing projects take on a little bit extra work to help execute those 5 additional projects. So overall, that's a huge boost to productivity, where you can also keep your costs lower for the company, which in turn will benefit the stock price and shareholders. Here in red, we have a very interesting comment from Pichai, and it's in response to an employee asking a question about the Pixelbook job cuts. And that's what we discussed earlier, where basically the whole Pixelbook project was cut and the employees were laid off on it. So an employee asked about that, and Pichai responded by saying that telling the entire workforce of cuts is not a scalable way to do it, but he said he will try and notify the company of more important updates. So this is kind of concerning because he's almost saying that it's not a good method to announce that the company is going to cut 10% of its jobs. Instead, he kind of sees it as something that should happen, behind the scenes and not really get, direct attention. And that instead he's going to focus on, how the company is moving forward in terms of, innovation and things like that. So it's still concerning because he hasn't really taken layoffs and job cuts, mass layoffs or mass job cuts off the table. Obviously, they've cut some areas like the Pixelbook, and they've talked about slowing hiring, which again is huge and will help them kind of lean down. But overall, layoffs in terms of companies' growth is relatively a negative thing moving forward, and could turn into a bad thing for Google, especially with a lot of the growth vectors that they have moving forward. I found this comment very interesting from Pichai, and I remember when Google was small and scrappy, and he says that fun didn't always, and we shouldn't always equate fun with money. And I think you could walk into a hardworking startup and people may be having fun, and it shouldn't always equate with money. So overall, it's kind of interesting because he's almost relating, Google back to its startup days. So kind of saying that he wants Google to go back and kind of start reverting back to its roots, that it started up as a startup company and they were a lot, smaller workforce, a lot more people driven on, focusing on how they could help their employees, but, do it in a fun way, and not necessarily be always associated with, the money that's thrown at parties and things like that. So overall, very interesting comment from Pichai, and kind of preluding of, what his focus is for Google moving forward. Before we jump into my thoughts on all of that, I wanted to point out a couple things. The first being the PE ratio. The PE ratio currently we're sitting at a 16, the forward PE ratio is sitting at a 16.23, and that is almost half of what it was a year ago, which is absolutely insane. And the second thing being Google's balance sheet. So this is almost a year old now. So obviously these numbers have changed. Yahoo only updates it once a year, but current assets, they were sitting at $188 billion. And in terms of cash, they were sitting at $139 billion, or cash equivalents. And then in terms of current liabilities, they're only at $64 billion. So they have a 3-to-1 ratio of assets to current liabilities, which is absolutely massive. You're not going to find much better of a balance sheet than this here for Google. The big event that we have coming up in a little less than a month is Google's earnings. So they are expected to announce earnings on October 25th. And this will be a huge moment for Google and really for the rest of the market, because what is going to happen is if there is a lot more negativity in terms of a lot of companies reporting poor earnings, then we will see the market continue to crash down. And this would be the same for Google. And the comments that the CEO has made kind of during this conference would be concerning and kind of promotes almost the fact that Google is likely going to present earnings that are less than favorable, especially for a quarter that's a summer quarter, which overall, is one of the lower quarters for companies like Google, Amazon, Apple, companies like that. But if the opposite is true, and the CEO is kind of preemptively, preparing people just in case things end up bad, and he's kind of starting, this narrative to keep the stock price low, and all of a sudden we see a lot of these earnings turning around and big beats by companies like Google, Amazon, Apple, Meta, a lot of those big tech companies, then this has the potential to be a massive move to the upside for Google and those other companies, because we could see earnings come in, see either slight beats or even significant beats. If we see significant beats, we'll see a lot of these companies shoot up by a lot. If we see just slight beats, the company, I think, will still move up in, a substantial way, but not, as significant as, if we saw huge earning announcements where a lot of these companies were beating by double digits on their EPS and, 5+% on their revenue growth. So overall, I do like Google stock. I think long term it is a great company, and I'm not really concerned over, a lot of these short-term things. I think that a lot of this tightening of the belt and leaning down of a lot of these companies is overall going to be a positive for the next 3 to 5 years. But in the next 1 to 2 years, anyone's guess is kind of what happens. There's a lot of companies across the board who are tightening their belts, whether it's Apple, Netflix, Google, any of these large tech companies, Facebook, they're all kind of resorting to this tightening down, trimming the fat type of mentality, which is overall positive. It's kind of part of the cycle that you see with a lot of these businesses. So I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts in the comment section down below. Also, if you like the video, make sure you drop a like down below. And if you want to see more videos like this one, make sure you hit that sub button. And as always, guys, have a wonderful rest of your day.